Hello and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Shivam Shukla. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer currently working at GTechLearn Private Limited. And I will be going to be your host for today's this 45 minutes tightly scheduled webinar today, where we will be discussing about Microsoft Azure SQL services provided by the Microsoft. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to thank you everyone for joining us, whether you have joined from over to the Zoom meetings or maybe you guys are watching us from any of the streaming media channels itself. On behalf of us and the entire team, I would like to welcome you on board. So without any further delay, let's get started with our webinar. So before moving forwards towards the webinar, let's just discuss about the today's agenda, that what are the things we will be discovering as a part of this specific webinar planned here. So first of all, we are going to have a quick introduction about the Azure SQL Database services. Then after, we are going to understand how we can go and manage the SQL database in Azure using the different deployment models as well as the deployment tools. Then after, we are going to learn how many methods do we have to deploy the SQL databases in the Azure. Then after, we are going to discussing about some best practices for managing the database using the Azure services. Then after, we have the demonstration on purpose. And then after, in the last, we are going to have some sort of Q&A sessions where you guys can go ahead and ask your questions and we'll be happy to answer towards them. So now let's get started with our today's webinar here. So first of all, let's discuss what is Azure SQL Database. So Azure SQL Database is a fully managed platform as a service database engines that handles most of the database management functions such as upgrading, patching, backups, monitoring without any kind of user involvement. Azure SQL Database is always going to be run on the latest stable version of the SQL Server database engine and patched operating system with 99.99% of availability. Platform as a service capabilities that are built into the Azure SQL database enable us to focus only with the domain specific database administrations activities and optimizations activities that are critical for your business. With Azure SQL Database, you can create a highly available and high performance data storage layer for the applications and the solutions in the Azure SQL. Database can be the right choice for a variety of modern cloud applications because it's going to be enable you to process both relational data and non-relational structure as graphs, JSONs, PTL, and XML files. However, in the SQL database, we are going to work with the relational database here. So SQL database going to be enable you to easily define and scale performance within the two different purchasing models. The first purchasing models we have is related to the Vcore based purchasing model. That means here we are going to discuss about how much of virtual core of CPUs to be required related to our database services. And the second one is going to be DTU based purchasing model. So SQL database is a fully managed service that has the built-in high availability, backups, and the common maintenance operations. So Microsoft going to be handle all the patching and updating related data of the SQL and the operating system code. You don't have to worry about any kind of underlying infrastructure as well. So moving forward, if I'm talking about our next option, do we have related to the SQL deployment types here? So we have the different deployment types are available. The first one is related to the infrastructure as a service, and the second one is related to the platform as a service. So if we are talking about the infrastructure as a service, so over there, Azure will going to allow us to create a SQL database inside a virtual machine where we are going to configure a virtual machine first, and then after we are going to configure a specific SQL server, and inside that servers we can have the multiple databases available. Based on that, if we are using this infrastructure as a service platform on our side, so we need to configure and manage the underlying infrastructure from our sites. However, in a physical term, the infrastructure is going to be managed by the Azure in the backend. We just have to configure our virtual machines where we have to define that how much of compute do we require, how much of RAM do we require, how much of storage do we require, and which type of storage do we want, related to what are the different endpoints do we wanted to connect it. Other than that, how we can go and configure those things in our environment and how the things is going to be work. So those things is going to be attached under the infrastructure as a service platform. The next service we can use related to the SQL database is platform as a service database. So we can also use this deployment types where we can define only the database what we require. So we have to just create a specific database. Other than that, the underlying infrastructure is going to be managed by the Azure itself totally, that how many virtual machines required onto the backend, which type of storage it is required, how the backups is going to be done, how the patching is going to be done, how the updation is going to be done. Each and everything is going to be managed by the Azure itself. What we need to do, we just need to create a SQL database in the Azure platform itself, and we can start working with the platform as a service. So these are the two different deployment types are available related to the SQL servers or SQL databases. Moving forward, if I'm talking about deployment models, so we have the multiple deployment models also in place. The first one is related to the single database. That means whenever you wanted to work with a single dedicated database, you can go and use this deployment models in your Azure platform for creating a multiple sets of databases to be available. And in each and every single database, you need to go and select the specific set of virtual cores, number of CPUs do we require for the calculation purpose, and also how much of storage do we require. Other than that, the RAM, the type of storage, everything is going to be managed by the Azure itself. So we have to define the number of virtual core CPUs do we require or how much of the storage do we want. Moving forward, we have a next module types is related to the elastic pools. So elastic pool is something where we are going to create a specific type of a container, which we called as a elastic pool. And inside a single container, we can have the multiple databases to be available, and we can use the shared infrastructure as well. So for an example, I'm saying that you are deploying a database using the single database scenarios, and inside a single database, you are saying that I'm going to use approximately 2 virtual core of CPUs and 32 gig of RAM. So based on that, that much of infrastructure is going to be used only for your single database, what we have created. But when it comes towards the elastic pool, so in that scenario, it is going to use the same infrastructure for all the databases available. So let us say we have created an elastic pool here. Inside that, let us say we have used a 4 virtual core of CPUs and 64 gig of RAM. So whenever we are creating any kind of database in this elastic pools, it is going to use the same infrastructure every time, and it is going to use it as onto the shared basis. However, whether we are deploying the 2 different databases inside the elastic pools or 4 databases or 6 databases or 8 databases, everything is going to be used using this shared infrastructure scenario. However, in the single database, it's going to be multiplied by the number of instances we have created. So that is the difference between the single database and the elastic pools. So now let's start with the demonstrations of the specific SQL database here. So let's get started with the demonstration. So now we have the demo in place. Let me just open up the portal, and here we can see that if we are talking about using the SQL service inside the Azure, so we have the multiple options available. So first of all, however, whenever we are going to create any of the resources, we need to create a specific resource group for that. So let me go and create a specific resource group first for my SQL databases. So let me go and create it. And here I'm going to say my resource group name is going to be SQL db SQL RG. And I just wanted to create a resource group in the HTTPS location. Let me go for hit on review and create, and let me hit on create button. So that's how we can create a resource group. Now we are talking about the Azure SQL Service. So let me go and find the Azure SQL Service here. Inside the Azure SQL Service, if you just wanted to create a SQL server, so you can go for hit on that create button. And here we have the three different types of deployment models in presence. We can use the SQL database. We can go for SQL virtual machines. So SQL virtual machine is going to become under the infrastructure as a service. However, the SQL database and the SQL managed instance is going to become under the platform as a service. So currently I'm saying that we wanted to deploy our SQL database using the infrastructure as a service. So how we can go and enable this? So let me go and use this drop down button for SQL virtual machine servers, and let me select a specific image do we want related to which I wanted to deploy the VM. So let me go and select it and hit on that create button. After hitting on that create button, it is going to ask me to provide the subscriptions under which you wanted to proceed the billing. Then after, it is going to ask you to select the resource group under which you wanted to contain this VM. Then after, it is going to ask you to create the virtual machine name. So let us say that my machine name is going to be SQL machine 01. This is going to be my name. I just wanted to deploy this machine under the HTTPS location, so I can go for the HTTPS scenario. Then after, it is going to ask me the availability options. So currently I'll say I don't want to use any kind of availability options using my virtual machine. However, if we are working with the platform as a service basis, so over there, the availability options is going to be activated automatically. We just have to select which type of availability options do we want to require. In the security type, I'm not going to change any things. Let me go for size. We are using it 2 virtual CPUs and 8 GB of RAM. If you wanted to increase it, you can increase it using the 4 virtual CPUs and 28 GB of memory itself if it's required. Then after, you need to provide the specific username and the password for your virtual machine infrastructure. So let me provide the username and passwords. And then after, I'm saying I just wanted to enable the RDP port of my VM so that I can take the remote sessions of my SQL virtual machines in any of the cases whenever we wanted to work with. If you wanted to connect that SQL server with your multiple applications access, you can enable this HTTP and HTTPS service also. This time I'm just working with the RDP section here. Going for the disk scenario, so under the disk platform, you will have to select which type of operating system disk do you want it to add related to your virtual machine. So you can go and work with the premium SSD. We can go and work with the standard SSD and the standard SSD. The SLA is going to be different based on the type of OS disk you are going to select it. So we are going to work with the premium SSD. And here you can also go and enable your OS disk using the customer managed key and the platform managed key itself. Going for the networking sections, let me review that what is going to be the virtual network for my SQL virtual machines, how we are going to connect it, what is going to be the subnet, which public IP do we want it to assign with my virtual machines. So you can go and select all of those options from here. You can also select which type of network security groups do you want it to associate with your NIC. Going for the management section, here you can enable the basic plan for free and you can disable the boot diagnostics if you want. Going for the advanced sections, in the advanced sections, if you just wanted to install any kind of applications in your virtual machines, you can go and use this extension button to install that specific softwares at the time of installing this virtual machines directly. Going for the SQL Server settings, in the SQL Server settings, it is going to ask me that which type of connectivity do we require related to your SQL Server, what is going to be your port, in which do you are going to connect it, then after which type of authentication do we require. So first of all, you can go for SQL connectivity in the 3 different ways. First of all, you can go for local. That means the SQL Server is going to be connected from the inside connection only from the virtual machines itself. Then after, you can go and work with the private connection where it is going to share the resources with the same virtual network itself. Then after, if you wanted to connect with a specific applications who needs a public access to be required, you can go and enable this public access as well. But the best practice is to enable the private connection only. So I'm going with the private connections using this port called 1433. Then after, I'm going to use the SQL authentication for the authentication of my SQL server. So let me go and enable it. And here we can provide the login name and password. So let us say I just wanted to provide the login name and password as onto the same, just like I have provided it by my virtual machine. So I'm not going to change it. It is going to by default opt the same username and passwords which we have defined under the basics tab. Then after, if you have the Azure Vault key available, you can go for Azure Key Vault integration as well. And from here also, you can enable your authentication perspectives. Moving forward, you can go for storage configurations where you can define how much of a storage do you require in your virtual machines for your SQL database and which type of speed do we require. So you can go for change configuration option itself. And here you can define how much of a storage do we require for my virtual for my SQL Server. That currently I'm using the premium SSD P30 where I'm using the 1024 gig of data. That means 1 TB of data I can store. You can go with the maximum or 32,766 gig of database here. Then after, in the number of disk sections, you need to define how many disks do you want it to associate with your virtual machines itself. So one is going to be added for the data storage and the second one is going to be added for your log storage. So let me hit on OK, and now my storage sections has been configured. Same way, if you just wanted to configure the SQL instance settings, you can go for changing the instance settings as well if you don't have enabled and automatically. Then after, related to the automatic patching, if you wanted to change the configurations, like you wanted to enable the auto patching onto the daily basis or to the specifically day basis, you can go and change the configurations from here. You can also disable the enable patching option. You can also enable it. Based on that, you can define the day in which do you wanted to patch your specific servers. So let me hit on OK with the default configurations. And then after, if you just wanted to enable the automatic backup, you can enable the service from here and you can select the specific retention period and you can define the storage container where you are going to store the backup. So currently I'm not going to enable it by default. We are going to enable it from the physical machine itself. Once we have everything in place, we can go for review and create option and we can hit on that create button for SQL virtual machine here. So let me just wait for the creation. Okay, once the validation is going to be passed, what we need to do, we need to hit on this create button and my SQL Server VM is going to be created into my Azure platform automatically. So that is something how we can go and configure the infrastructure as a service for Azure SQL. Now, the second thing is we wanted to create a SQL server based on to the specific set of database itself. So for using the platform as a service, what we can do, we can again go for Azure SQL. And from here, let me just go back. Let me go for this service. And here I'm going to create a SQL server, sorry, it's a SQL database as onto the single database here. So let me go for SQL database. And here you can see that we have the multiple options available. We can go for single database, we can go for elastic pool, and also we can go for database server. So this time I just wanted to create a single database here. So I'm selecting the single database scenario. Let me hit on create button. After hitting on create button, Let me go and select the subscriptions under which we wanted to set a billing. Then after, what is going to be my resource group? I can select my resource group here. Then after, we need to provide a specific database name. So let me provide a database name called SQL DB01 Shivam. That is going to be the name of my database here. Let me copy it. And then after, at the time of creating the SQL database, you always need to have a SQL server in place. If you don't have the SQL server available, your database is not going to be created. So you need to create a specific server. Inside the server, you don't have to provide any kind of configurations. You just need to provide the authentication values. And if we are talking about that Azure will going to charge me for SQL Server or not, so related to them, the answer is no. You don't have to pay the charge for the SQL Server here in the Azure portal. It is going to be a free service. However, how many of database you are going to connect with your SQL Server, you are going to pay accordingly your databases, whatever you are creating. So you don't have to pay for the server, but still you need to pay for the databases. How many do you have? So let me go and create a server first. I'm going to call my server is SQL DB01 Shivam. So let me go and provide the values into the lower conditions because it is going to ask me to provide the value in the lower conditions. And let me provide the S onto the lower as well. Okay, so now my server name is in place. We can select the specific location. Where do we want it to create a server? So let us say I'm going to create my server in the East-US locations. And then after it is going to ask me the authentication method for my SQL server. So I can define the authentication method. You can go for SQL authentication itself, where you will have to provide the username and the password for your admin login. You can also enable the second option related to which you can define a specific Active Directory user who will going to be able to access your SQL Server. Or also you can go for both options as onto the same time. So let us say I just wanted to enable the SQL authentication here. Let me provide the username and then let me provide the password. Once we have the username and password in place, we can hit on OK button. So that's how the easy way you can create a specific server if you don't have any of the server available as of now. Then after, we have this option called want to use SQL Elastic Pool. So we are going to do it just a little bit later. This time I'm saying I don't want to use any kind of Elastic Pool as of now. So going for the no button. Then after, it is going to ask me to provide a specific set of configuration related to the compute and storage. So currently you can see by default, it is giving me a 2 virtual core of CPUs to be available to be used and 32 gig of storage as well. Let us say I just wanted to change some sort of options here. So you can select the number of virtual core CPUs max up to 80 virtual CPUs here. Apart from that, you can go for maximum size of a specific database related to the 1 TB of data only. So that is a basic things available in the general purpose scenario. So you can configure how many virtual machines to a virtual core CPUs do you want, how much of data do you want with your database itself. And related to the changes you are going to make, it is going to show you the details, how it is going to charge you, that how much it is going to cost you. So I'm saying that I wanted to use a 2 virtual CPUs and 32 gig of RAM, hitting on that apply button. And then after, it is going to ask me to select the backup storage redundancy. That means Azure will going to take the backup automatically of my SQL database, but still we need to define which type of backup do we want, whether we wanted to work with the local redundant backup storage, whether we wanted to work with the zone redundant, whether we wanted to work with the geo redundant. So what are the difference between them? So first of all, if we are talking about the local redundant backup storage, so in that scenario, my 3 copies of my SQL database is going to be created, and all those copies is going to be stored onto the same physical data center of the Azure where my primary database is available. So if that database is going to be down, we'll face some sort of issues while accessing that specific database here. Moving forward, if we are talking about the zone redundant backup storage, that means it is going to create me a 3 copy of my database into the different zones available in a single region. So you can go for the zone redundant, as well as if you just wanted to create a multiple copies over to the multiple regions itself. So you can go for geo redundant storage. That means if we are creating this specific database in the East US location, my another copy is going to be created in the West US also. So that's how the geo redundant storage is going to be worked. So let us say this time I just wanted to go for local redundant backup storage only. That means I just wanted to create a backup onto the same physical data centers itself. Going for the networking section, under the networking tab, you can select which type of networking do you want in your physical data center, in your physical database itself. Whether you wanted a no access of your database, whether you wanted a public connectivity, whether you wanted a private connectivity. So if you have any of the private connectivity available, you can go and add your private endpoint, where you can define your endpoint name. And then after, you can select what is going to be your virtual network itself, related to which do you wanted to create a private endpoint. And once you have connected yourself, you can hit on that OK button, and that endpoint is going to be added automatically. So you can configure a specific set of virtual network, and inside that virtual network, you can associate your SQL database so that whatever the applications are present in that same virtual network will be able to access your database queries itself. If you don't want to provide any of the access, you can go for no access here. But let us say I wanted to provide a connectivity method based on the public endpoint, because we are going to access the data using the public internet. So that's why I need to open the public endpoint here. However, the best practice is always use the private endpoint here. So I'm going with the public endpoint. Then in the public endpoint, we have this option present called Firewall Rules. So by default, whenever we are creating any kind of SQL databases inside the Azure will going to protect my database to be accessed by any of the IPs itself. It is going to provide me a no connection based access as onto the by default method. So if any time you wanted to access the database, you need to add your specific public IP address to the Azure firewall itself. Until you are not going to create a firewall rules, you will not be able to access that databases here. So let me show you how we can add the specific client IP. So you can go and enable this button as yes, called add current client IP address itself. So that means whatever my physical machine's public IP address is going to be connected automatically with the SQL servers as onto the firewall rules, so that I can access the database from my physical PC itself. So going for yes button, and then after going for security here, you can enable the Microsoft Defender for SQL itself if you want. And you can also go for ledger issues. You can also create your identities itself. You can also go and change your data encryption method itself. So by default, it is going to encrypt your data based on that transparent data encryptions using the Microsoft managed key. So you can also go and select your own managed key itself if you wanted to encrypt the data according to your key. Once we have everything available, we can go for additional settings. In the additional settings, it is going to ask me to provide the specific data source to be available. So if you have any kind of previous database available, which you wanted to use as onto the deployment of this one from my backup, so you can go and select your backup scenarios. And here you need to select the storage account. Where do you have the backup available? Then you need to select the container, and then you need to select the specific set of SQL database related to which you wanted to receive the backup here. You can also go and use the none button so that you can create your own database itself in the SQL database scenarios. Then after this time, I'm going to create a sample database so that I can show you how we are going to access the SQL database with my physical PC and how we are going to query over to my database itself. So going with the sample data now. And once we have selected this one, let me hit on review and create button. And once the validation is going to be passed, here you can see it is going to show me how much of the charge it's going to be billed me on my subscriptions. Once we have everything in place, we can go for create button. That's how you can go and create your different sets of SQL database in your Azure portal. Moving forward till the time SQL database is deploying, if we are talking about creating the elastic pool and using the elastic pool, we can go and create the SQL database itself. So how it's going to be done? So let me move back towards the second portal here. And this time I'm saying I just wanted to create an elastic pool, and inside the single elastic pool, I wanted to have the multiple databases available. So how it's going to be done? So we can go and search a service called here called elastic pool. So you can see the service is present called SQL Elastic Pool. We can go for hit one, and we can create a specific set of elastic pools, whatever we required. So let me go for searching this one. And here I'm going to create an elastic pool in this specific resource group, going to call a elastic pool name called pool01. And this time it is going to ask me to select the specific server. So let me create a new server this time. This time it's going to be SQL DB Elastic 01, my server name. And this time I'm going to deploy this server into the EastUS2 location. So I'm going to select the location called EastUS2, and I wanted to use the specific set of authentication value. So let me provide the details and hitting on OK. So that's how we can go and create the SQL Elastic pools. Once it's done, we have to go and select the specific set of compute and storage, whatever we required. So because we are creating a elastic pool that is a shared environment for my databases, so we have to increase our virtual number core of CPUs itself. So let me go with the 4 virtual core of CPUs with 64 gig of RAM it here, and I wanted to hit on apply button. So let me go for additional settings. If you wanted to provide the maintenance window, you can provide the maintenance window here as well. Once it's done, let me hit on create. So that's how you can go and create your elastic pools in your scenarios. So let's just wait till the time it is deploying. Once the elastic pool is going to be configured, we are going to see how we can create a multiple set of databases itself in the single elastic pool. It is taking some time. Till the time my elastic pool is going to be deployed, let's just move forward and talk about how we are going to access the previously created database from our portal. So if we are talking about that, whatever the database we have created, if we just wanted to access that specific database and wanted to perform any kind of queries, how we can access it? So we'll have to find a service called SQL Databases here from the Azure portal, and you will find your own database, whatever you have created previously. Inside this one, you can go for query editor options, and here you can provide the specific password for accessing your database here. Once it's done, let me hit on OK. And now you can see that we are able to access our database from our Azure portal. We can go and run a query whatever we want. Let us say I just wanted to select the database from the sales.address customer. Let me hit on run button. Okay. Select star from, sorry, previously I didn't mention the from sales lt.custom address. Let me hit on run button. So here you can see that my query has been running successfully and we can see the details. Same way, if I'll say I just wanted to select the city only from the sales lt.customers, we can hit on run button and here you can see that it is only selecting me the city, whatever it is based on to my physical, based on my sample data do we have. Other than that, if I'll go for the overview sections here in the database scenario, and we are going for the set server firewall options. So here you can see that by default, it has currently added my physical machine's IP address. If I'll show you my physical machine's IP address here, that what is my IP. So here you can see that this is my physical machine's IP address is presented 223.190.90.187, and that is automatically added into this firewall rule. So Azure is well enough to read out your physical machine's public IP automatically, and it is going to add it in your firewall rules itself. If you didn't add it at the time of deploying the database, so you can go and hit this button called add client IP button. And here also it is going to create another firewall rule where it is going to define your physical public IP address to be available. Other than that, if you just wanted to provide a specific access to the set of the IP addresses, that is to a range of IP address. So you can define your start IP address range from here and you can end your IP address range here. So that's how you can enable the firewall settings in your environment. So that is some things how we can access the SQL databases from our physical machines. Same way, just like we have created a specific virtual machines called SQL machine 01. If you just wanted to access this physical machine on your physical PC, so this virtual machine on your physical PC, so how we can connect this machine? We can go for this connect button. We can go for the RDP session and we can download the specific RDP file, whatever it is required. So let me open up that RDP file here. And once it done, we can go for connect button. And then after it is going to ask me to provide the username and password. So let me say this is going to be my username for connecting my physical machines. And this is going to be my password. After providing the username and password, it is going to ask me to allow the access for the certifications. Let me hit on yes button, and that's how the connection is going to be created with my this infrastructure as a service physical machine do we have. So we can go and enable it and we can start working with that physical machines in terms of whatever we require. So let's wait till the time it is opening. And here you can see that we are able to access our physical machines virtual machine SQL Server itself. So you can start working with this SQL Server also. It is an infrastructure as a service present. However, the second database which we have created, that is a platform as a service available. So let me just close the connection as of now. I don't want to work with that machine now. And here you can see that my elastic pool is now created. Now I'm saying I just wanted to create some sort of databases using these elastic pools. So how it's going to be work? So let me go for Azure SQL. Let me go for create. And here I just wanted to use the elastic pools. Let me go for create. And here we can go and provide the elastic pool name. But this time I'll say that I already have the elastic pool available. I just wanted to create a database. So we can go for single database, go for create. And inside this one, we can go and use this elastic pool server here. We can select the specific elastic pool, whatever it is present. So let me select the HTOS2 server because we have created an elastic pool in the HTOS2 server. So we have selected this one, and here you can see that we have this pool available. We just have to provide a database name, the DB01 Shivam, and we are creating it under this elastic pool. Once it done, let me go for providing the additional settings using the sample database, going for review and create, and let me go for networking as well. Here I just wanted to add the client IP, going for the review and create. So here you can see that once we are using the elastic pool scenario for creating the SQL databases in the Azure, it is not going to charge me anything because the charge, the amount which we have to charge it for this specific database is already been included in the SQL pool, whatever we have creating. So you can see it is saying that the cost has been included in the pool and we don't have to pay additional cost for the server for the specific database. Once we have this thing in place, we can go for hitting on create, and that's how you can create your SQL database using the elastic pool scenarios. So that all the things which we have planned for today's session, for today's this webinar sessions here. Let me move back towards the PowerPoint slides. And if you guys are wanted to connect with our upcoming events, so you can go and scan this QR code from your mobile phone and you will be able to access the list of the upcoming webinars. Also, if you just wanted to register yourself from our ongoing webinar series, so you can go and register yourself using this URL called https://gtechlearn.com/webinars.aspx. So you can go and register yourselves into the upcoming webinars from here. So thanks for attending, guys. The today's webinar related to the SQL Azure. You guys have been great audience to us. And now this is a question time. So let me just open up the chat options from the Zoom as well as from the different streaming media platform so that you guys can go ahead and ask your questions here, and we'll going to attend some sort of questions and provide you the resolutions accordingly. So I have just enabled the chat box. Now I just want you guys to go ahead and ask your queries, whatever you want. Okay, so we have received a specific question called what are the different features of Azure SQL is presents? Okay, so if we're talking about the features of the SQL, so first of all, we have the feature available called scalability and resource management, which will help us in moving the larger database into the pools for the better performance. The second feature do we have related to the Azure SQL is performance tuning, where it is going to help us, the Azure customers, to know how their database is working. Then the third feature do we have is related to the security capabilities, where it is going to help us to adding more layer of protections, including the audit logs, data masking, and compliance certifications in the Azure SQL. The next feature do we have is related to the scalability of SQL database, which will help us to easily forecast the budget and adjust the cost based on reporting. And also we have another feature called business consistency is present, which will help us in higher performance and load balancings with the use of failover groups, which can take advantages among a number of Azure data centers. So these are the some features which is available related to the Azure SQL. Okay, so now we have another question in place, that how many replicas are going to be maintained for each Azure SQL database? Okay, so for the same thing, we can say that Azure SQL database going to maintain the 3 replicas for each database. One of them is going to be a primary replica. As when one replica goes down, the other replica is going to be promoted onto the backend without knowing to the customer. Okay, now we have another question in place, that what is the difference between Azure SQL and SQL Server? So in the SQL Server, the database are the only entity on the database server, but in the Azure SQL, a single database can host the databases from the different customers. In other words, Azure SQL is a multi-tenant and shared its physical resources with all clients who wanted to use those services. So that is the difference between Azure SQL, the on-premises, and to the SQL Server in the Azure. Okay, guys, thanks for attending this webinar here. I hope you guys learn some sort of new things related to this webinar. And I hope that we'll meet again into the next upcoming webinars itself. Thank you guys. Thanks for joining it here.